Imagine an island where the echoes of indigenous drums blend with the distant roar of colonial cannons, where the scent of rich tobacco fields mingles with the salt of the Caribbean Sea. This is Cuba, a land whose history is as vibrant and tumultuous as its tropical landscapes. Join us as we traverse the centuries, uncovering the pivotal moments that have shaped this resilient nation. Long before European sails pierced the horizon, Cuba was home to indigenous communities, notably the Taino, Guanahatabe peoples. These early inhabitants thrived as skilled farmers, hunters, and fishers, cultivating crops like cassava and tobacco, and establishing a rich cultural tapestry that laid the foundation for Cuba's identity. Their villages, known as bohíos, dotted the lush countryside, and their society was governed by caciques, or chiefs, who maintained order and led religious ceremonies honoring deities linked to nature. Despite their well-established societies, the fate of Cuba's indigenous peoples took a tragic turn with the arrival of European explorers. The diseases, enslavement, and forced labor imposed by the Spaniards decimated their populations. Within a century of European contact, the once thriving indigenous presence had all but disappeared, leaving behind a cultural legacy woven into Cuban identity. The year 1492 marked a seismic shift in Cuban history. Christopher Columbus, on his quest for a new route to Asia, landed on Cuba's northeastern coast, claiming the island for Spain, mistaking it for a peninsula of the Asian mainland. Columbus's arrival heralded the dawn of European colonization, forever altering the island's trajectory. By 1511, under the command of Diego Velázquez de Cuellar, Spanish forces commenced the systematic conquest of Cuba. They established settlements like Baracoa and Santiago de Cuba, while facing fierce resistance from indigenous leaders such as Hatuey, a Taino chief who led an impassioned fight against the Spanish, but was ultimately captured and burned at the stake. With the indigenous population decimated by warfare, enslavement, and European diseases, the Spanish looked elsewhere for labor to sustain their colonial ambition. Enslaved Africans were brought to the island in increasing numbers, creating the foundation for Cuba's evolving cultural and racial identity. The 17th and 18th centuries saw the rise of sugar as Cuba's economic cornerstone. The island's fertile land and tropical climate made it ideal for sugarcane cultivation, leading to the establishment of massive plantations. To fuel this labor-intensive industry, the Spanish crown imported hundreds of thousands of enslaved Africans, marking the darkest chapter in Cuba's history. The sugar boom transformed Cuba into Spain's most valuable colony. By the late 18th century, Havana had become a bustling port city, its harbor filled with ships transporting sugar, rum, and tobacco to markets across Europe and the Americas. This period also saw an emerging class of wealthy Cuban landowners, many of whom would later play a pivotal role in the island's push for independence. The vast disparity between the wealth of landowners and the brutal conditions of enslaved workers became an ever-growing source of tension. As the 19th century dawned, Cuba was ripe for revolution. Inspired by independence movements in the Americas, Cuban nationalists began agitating for liberation from Spanish rule. The 10 Years' War, 1868 to 1878, led by figures like Carlos Manuel de Céspedes, saw Cuban insurgents rise against Spanish authorities. But despite a decade of fierce resistance, the war ended without achieving full independence. However, the struggle continued. In 1895, José Martí, the poet and revolutionary leader, reignited the fight for sovereignty. His vision for a free Cuba gained momentum, and soon, Spanish forces found themselves embroiled in a full-scale war. The conflict caught the attention of the United States, whose intervention in 1898, following the explosion of the USS Maine, led to the Spanish-American War. By the war's end, Spain ceded control of Cuba, marking the birth of a new republic. Yet true autonomy remained elusive. Although Cuba gained formal independence in 1902, it remained under the shadow of American influence. The Platt Amendment allowed the U.S. to intervene in Cuban affairs and maintain a military presence at Guantanamo Bay. In the decades that followed, Cuba became a playground for American businesses and tourists, with Havana evolving into a glitzy metropolis of casinos, nightclubs, and luxury hotels. Yet beneath the glamour, political instability festered. Corruption, inequality, and authoritarian rule fueled widespread discontent, setting the stage for revolutionary change. The resentment toward foreign control, combined with growing economic disparity, set the foundation for the radical shifts that were to come. The 1950s saw the emergence of Fidel Castro, a young lawyer turned revolutionary who led a guerrilla movement against the US-backed dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista. Alongside figures like Che Guevara, Castro orchestrated a successful insurgency, culminating in Batista's ousting on January 1, 1959. The Cuban Revolution drastically reshaped the island. Castro's government implemented sweeping reforms, nationalizing industries, redistributing land, and aligning Cuba with the Soviet Union. While Che Guevara is often romanticized as a revolutionary icon, his legacy is far more complex. After helping Fidel Castro overthrow Batista, Guevara oversaw trials and executions at La Cabaña fortress, where hundreds of political opponents and suspected counter-revolutionaries were executed without due process. As Cuba transitioned into a one-party communist state, dissent was ruthlessly suppressed. Writers, artists, and journalists faced censorship, while political prisoners were sent to forced labor camps, like the infamous UMAP, military units to aid production. The regime's promises of equality came at a steep cost, with everyday Cubans living under heavy surveillance, rationing, and the threat of imprisonment for speaking against the government. Though Guevara spoke of creating a socialist utopia, his rigid ideology and brutal enforcement of communist policies left a legacy that is still debated today. This transformation put Cuba at the heart of Cold War tensions, leading to major events such as the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961 and the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, which brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. In the decades that followed, Cuba endured economic hardships, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, which severed a vital source of financial and political support. The country struggled through the special period, a time of severe shortages, but adapted through resilience, tourism expansion, and foreign alliances. The island's leadership maintained a firm grip on its socialist ideals, despite external pressures for reform. Today, Cuba remains a nation of contrasts. While it continues to face political and economic challenges, it boasts world-renowned achievements in healthcare, education, and culture. From its revolutionary legacy to its rich artistic traditions, Cuba remains a nation whose history is still being written. If you enjoyed this journey through time, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Join us next time as we take another step through history, one footprint at a time.